morning, Victory family. We have a very special podcast this week. As always, I'm joined by Pastor Don. Pastor Don, I'll let you go ahead and introduce your guests with us this week.
Thank you, Jason. Our guests today are John and Marcia Riggs. They are Baptist Bible Fellowship missionaries, have been since 1994. Has it really been that long?
Been that long.
Man, time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it? Brenda and I actually met the Riggs via youth camps. They were interning at a church here in Indiana up in Newcastle, and known them ever since and supported them pretty much ever since. I believe we started supporting them at our previous church in Rensselaer when they very first went to the field, and then supported them when they came here as well. So we are so glad to have them here today.
We're going to start off with a couple questions. They are missionaries to Zambia, like Pastor said, and we wanted to give you a glimpse, not so much into the normal church-based questions that we all ask when our missionaries come. You know, what's the food like? What's the money like? You know, different cultural differences. We really kind of wanted to get into more specific questions about their field. And Pastor Don, if you would go ahead and start us off.
Sure. One of the things I was curious to find out, looking back on it, and I realize we're talking 26 years in the past, but looking back on it, what went through your mind? What was it like when you first set foot, got off the plane, and began to try and get culturally acclimated to Zambia?
I had, a year before we got to Zambia as a family, I took a survey trip for a few weeks. So I had been there, so I learned a little bit then. But when we went to Zambia in 1996, then we arrived there October 3rd. You know, I'm a farm kid from Indiana. Grew up on a farm. You have in your mind Africa, and you think, you know, the old Tarzan movies, you know, land, this is a big jungle. Well, it's not that way. But arriving there, number one, taking your three daughters, our oldest was, I think, 16, our youngest was 16 or 17, youngest was 9. So arriving in Zambia, getting off the plane, number one, what have I gotten myself into? But you know, you kind of get you get there and you start doing things. Like I said, I had been there a year before, so I knew where a church was. When we arrived, the missionaries we were going to work with was not even in the country. We were by ourselves, so I knew where the church was. So we just started attending that church there. But you know, you like any country you go to, I'm assuming you get there, the smells are not the smells you're familiar with. The things you see are not things you're familiar with. The town we lived in, and most towns in Zambia, they're a bit different now, but then it's almost like going back to the 1950s. The look of the buildings were older buildings, so that was a bit different. But looking back over 24 years of actually being in Zambia, I guess the challenges was how to do ministry, and we do nothing now like we did then. I think the first term as a missionary, you figure out you don't have a clue what you're doing. You know, you think you go to college, you learn things, you try to figure out what you're going to do, you try to get in your mind, I'm going to do ministry this way, but the ministry we did then is nothing like we do ministry now. And a lot of that was because you observe other missionaries, whether it's an independent Baptist missionary for several at a time, whether it's other missionaries, you kind of observe what they do. You look at, from the outside, you look at the success you see. And oftentimes, the success you see from the outside, once you get on the inside, is not success at all. So we just changed a lot of things that we ministry-wise.
Okay. What surprised you the most when you first arrived in Zambia?
Probably everybody walks everywhere. More people have cars now than then. But you know, it's not unusual to walk an hour to go to church. A lot of people do. That would never happen here.
I was going to say, I wonder, I'm sitting here thinking, how many would we have in church next Sunday if that were the case?
Right.
The answer is, I really don't want to know, I suspect.
Right.
So other than learning a new language, what was the single biggest challenge you faced?
Like I mentioned, ministry, how to do ministry. Like I say, you observe other missionaries, the way they do it, and once you start doing ministry, it's probably true anywhere. What may work across town might not work for you. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
So same thing there, doing ministry, training. I think we'll get into it later on, but training men to do ministry instead of you being in the forefront. Let them, as a Zambian man, do ministry. They know the culture better than you'll ever know the culture. So that was probably the one thing.
Okay.
Marcia, as a woman and a mother, a missionary's wife, what really stands out to you personally as challenges that you face going to Zambia and being a missionary in Zambia?
Well, I think the thing that was hardest for me was watching the mothers there not be mothers. They have many children, but as one, they'll have their first one and then they'll have their second one. They pass that second one on to the first one to raise as they have another one and another one. And we go around the village and we would see little 3 and 4 year olds with a baby on the back and no mother around. So that was very hard for me because I was always saying, why isn't this child at home with the mother? You know, and things like that. But as a woman, it was very challenging to see the women did most of the work. Even when, you know, they were working outside the home, they were working in the home, they were taking care of the children, making most of the money as the men just sit. And that was just a real challenge to see how can you lead these women to follow their husbands as the spiritual leader when their husbands aren't doing anything to lead. Mm-hmm. And then as a missionary in general, I think the biggest challenge was getting to know the culture enough to be able to understand where the women are coming from. You know, it's different for an American to be able to give them, this is what the Bible says, you do this, when you really don't understand the culture as to whether this, or it's going to work for them. So those were some of the challenges.
This is not on the question we put down anywhere, but it just hit me. You raised 3 daughters on the mission field in a culture very different from the one you were in. What steps did you have to take to try and, how do I want to put it, keep them down a path you wanted them to go down rather than be absorbed into that culture?
Well, I think my girls were pretty easy, and I think it was the fact that we had always taught them that you love everyone no matter what. And so it was a matter of, as we started doing things, whether or not we would allow them to do things. The hardest thing for them was I wouldn't let them go and just walk on the street by themselves, where here in America that would be no big deal. But you go to a mission field with these pretty little blonde girls and you wonder, is somebody going to take them, try to get ransom, things like that. So you have to be very cautious that way. But as far as like them living their life, we tried to make it as normal as possible. They went to the youth groups, they went to, they were always in church, they were always in Sunday school, they were always doing activities with the Zambians. So it was just very easy, I think, for them to adapt to the culture. But I mean, we did have safeguards in place, but yet we wanted them to feel like they were a part of that world.
Okay. Now, you've been in Zambia for 24 years, right? Actually on field.
Right.
What are the biggest changes socially, governmentally? What are the biggest changes you've had to deal with?
As far as politically, Zambia is very stable politically. One of the few Zambian African countries never had a coup. They've had elections since independence '64. Was kind of a one-party state for a while, but it's still pretty politically stable. Of course, there's always trouble in politics. Election time comes around, but that has been not a lot of changes. Now, socially and culturally, there's been a lot of changes in Zambia in the last 24 years. I think a lot of it is due to the now openness that they did not have. It was kind of a very socialistic in the beginning. So now it's more of an open country. They're letting things come in, not only goods, but the television, the movies, the Western culture that we have is now ingrained in Zambia. And there's a lot of good things in our culture. There's a lot of bad things in the culture. So some of those bad influences that are in a free society are now, we see that coming into Zambian culture.
Okay.
You guys travel back and forth, obviously, here in the States now. Can you speak for a minute, candidly, about the state of the churches here in the States versus church in Zambia, and what can we as United States churches learn from the mission field? Not only are you trying to take what we have in the States here and helping them learn the Bible over there, but what can we learn from churches in Zambia?
You come back to the States. We were coming back every 4 years, coming back every 2 now, but you come back, and I don't think it's as much, don't see it as much in churches as you do in society as a whole. I remember when we first were saved, I wasn't raised in church, but missionaries would come in. This is back, in the 80s. You just see missionaries come in, and they were just shocked at the cultural changes when they come back. Now, if those missionaries, a lot of them are passed on now. If those missionaries would come back today, they would think they're in a whole new world, they're not in a different country. But some of those things we see culturally here. As far as churches, you can't make a general statement because all churches are different. I think for the main part, our churches are still pretty faithful in their attitude and their vision for reaching our world for Christ. Through this COVID thing, we've been in not a lot of churches yet, but we've been in several churches, and even through not being able to meet and not being able to have an online church and not be able to come in person back now. But what I've observed and seen, and what pastors have told me, that their people are still very faithful in giving their tithes, giving their mission, supporting that. But apathy does creep in to churches. We've been doing this for a lot of church believers in our churches. We've been doing this for all my life, and sometimes people, let's do something different. Well, just because it's different doesn't mean it's good. Just because it's different doesn't mean it's better. So there is that tendency of churches becoming apathetic, looking inward on us, and not have this worldwide vision of reaching our world for Christ. But for the most part, I think our churches are still got their eye in the right direction.
Good. Tell me a little bit about what are some of the victories that stand out, whether church planting is going. How many churches have you actually planted now in Zambia?
8.
Wow.
One's not quite, it's not really organized yet, but we did plant one that's no longer in existence. That happens from time to time, but we have 8 works going right now. Like I mentioned, we do nothing the way we did it when we first went. Now, for the last 15, well, maybe more than that, 20 years, I've been more focused on training men and women. I used to teach in a Bible college we have. They're still going. It's in a different city now, so I don't do that. I have Bible institutes. They meet at different locations, because if one church has more men that wants to go to a Bible institute, we might meet at his church. So I've been training men and women through our Bible institutes. I don't know how many, several in the 20s, maybe more than that now we've trained. Not all are out in the ministry, not all the men are pastoring. They were called to pastor, but they just want to know more about the Bible. but several of those men are pastoring. Some of those men are pastoring while they're in Bible Institute. So they're getting practical experience as well as biblical knowledge. So training men to plant churches. They're the pastor, I'm not. They're a person that the people look up to as their quote unquote leader, not me. So I think that's Paul's way of doing things from the Bible. I think it's a biblical model we're trying to emulate. So that is the victories of seeing those men being in the forefront, those men leading out the visitation program, the teaching, the preaching. Now I go there, we go there from time to time, the churches we started, but we're not there full time. So that is the victory, I believe, being seen.
Jason, I'm going to trade you questions because I need to explain this next one. You can have the one after that.
Okay.
Years ago, Brenda and I met a missionary, Dr. Richard Vick, who was a missionary back in the 60s and 70s in Ethiopia. When he wasn't trying to get Brenda and me called to Africa, which is pretty much every time we saw him, he loved to sit down. He would just tell stories about some of the cultural things, the strange things, unusual things. Anything, I read you work, Zambia is a very developed country. We get this idea, oh, they're a mission in Africa. That means thatched roofs, mud huts, and I know that's not the case. But anything unusual as far as dietary things or maybe things that have happened to you in people's homes?
Well, there are. Our works are mainly in town, in and around a major. Ndola is the third largest city, about 500,000. Luwansha, where he started out, about 150,000 to 200,000. So our works are mainly in or around a city. I know some missionaries that have a bush ministry, so that would be more what we think about Africa. Mud brick, thatched roof, they're there. Even around the edges of town, you may see these coming up. So those types of things are there. As far as some unusual foods, we've had grasshoppers. Not bad. They fry them. Anything fried is great. It tastes a little bit like bacon. They had caterpillars. I didn't try one. My wife did. I'll let you talk about that. She can talk about that.
It was really gross. It's supposed to be deep fried, but it wasn't. The person that made it boiled it because they didn't know what they were doing, which made it plump back up. So when you bit into it, you tasted the mud and the yuck. And so now I cannot bring myself to eat one that they cook. So
oh my!
Plus, it makes a lot of people's throat itch. So but it was really gross.
So we have tried some of them. And of course, the staple food in Zambia, they call it nshima. It's just cornmeal, white cornmeal, ground up really fine, almost like flour. And they cook it like a stiff porridge. You hold it in your hand and dip it in whatever you're eating. But years ago, I was with a friend of mine who's now pastoring back here in Illinois. We were going out and one of his bush works. He started a new work. It was way, way, way out in the bush. So on our way out, we were talking, and his work's in the bush. So I asked him about, have you ever had any monkey? He said, no, well, we could try one maybe. So we saw the guy he knew on the way out, and we stopped and talked to him. Hey, when's the monkey meat? He said, well, I think I can have some time you come back. So we went out in the bush, we preached, come back just a few hours later, and ran across the guy. He was by the roadside on his bicycle. And he had this, looked like an upper shoulder of a monkey, still had some hair on it. He wanted too much money for it, so we didn't buy it. But I was kind of curious about eating that. I've had buffalo, I've had alligator tail. What else we've had? Some of the game meat in Zambia. But the grasshoppers and one of the main. I've not tried them. They said they're really great. I may get the courage one day to do it. They eat these. They're mopani worms, they call them, and they eat those. I don't know if that was a mopani worm Marcia ate. May have been. They're just seasonal things, and then they also eat. They call it shukonono. It's what's the not the grasshoppers, the inswa. They're termites. They call them flying ants. You know, if you turn a light on, it attracts insects. So it attracts these. They'll take them, they'll just pull their wings off and just pop them out and eat them. The shell are really great. Haven't tried one.
Oh my.
We may. I don't know. Probably not.
We've talked a little bit about Western culture coming in. Do you guys have things that we see ultra commonly, you know, McDonald's and Taco Bell and things like that? Do you have any kind of westernized fast food?
There is, in the capital city, which is about 200 miles from us, there is a KFC. But probably the most popular fast food restaurant in Zambia is a place called Hungry Lion. It's a South African chain, fast food chain, and it's chicken. It's very similar to Kentucky Fried Chicken. I like it better than Kentucky Fried Chicken. They have those, a few pizza, fast food pizza. We even have a Pizza Hut in our town. I can call them up and they deliver to my house. That's kind of cool. Well, they're motorcycles. So I have a couple of those. Some other pizza places, fast food. Yeah. Nando's. There's some. If you're on the East Coast of America, there's a few Nando's. It's also a chicken place, grilled chicken.
So, what brought you to Zambia? How did God call you to Zambia? How did you know He was calling you to Zambia?
Marsh and I were saved in 1980 at Whittier Lane Baptist Church in Newcastle, Indiana. Didn't grow up in church. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a missionary. So much like, you know, your church, we had mission conferences, missionaries in all the time. So we were saying 84, a missionary was going to the Congo, was Zaire at that time. Came to our missions conference. The Lord started dealing in my heart then. We talked a bit about it in 84. 88, the same missionary had been on the field. He came back. I think I can't remember if it was a missions. I think it was a mission conference in 88. So that's the time we surrendered to be missionaries. We initially was going to go to the Congo, Zaire. While we were in Bible college in 91, Zaire again was closed down, had a big military rebels fighting going on. So pretty much closed down. All the missionaries had to leave. Some of the missionaries went down to Zambia, are still there now. So when we were there, pretty much closed down. We were about halfway through our Bible college 4 years. So I was talking to Brother Carl Boonstra. He's been the missions director for BBFI. I was talking to Brother Boonstra one day, and I was telling him this, and he said, I've been to Africa a lot. He'd been to Kenya, he'd been to Zaire and Tanzania, South Africa, when he was missions director. So I'd never been to Zambia. But he said, you go to sub-Saharan Africa, and he said, you may go to a different country, the language may be different, but the cultures are very similar in their cultural aspect. So we knew a missionary at the time was on deputation going to Zambia. So the Lord kind of directed us in that direction because Zaire was closed down. Now where we live in Andola, we're only about 3 miles from the Congo border. So we're close to the Congo. I've never been there officially. We've been there, one of our churches is about 200 yards from the Congo border, so we walked into the Congo just in the bush, opened up, just walking around where do you want to. But that's how the Lord directed us. Through generally, of course, our pastor, Brother Frank Wood, preaching, but missionaries coming, and God dealing with our heart about that.
Can I say something?
Yeah, of course.
When he talks about the first time he talked that the Lord was dealing with him, I just laughed. And I think it's very important that women need to know you need to be ready for if your husband gets called. And I wasn't ready at that time. And I think that's why God didn't impress upon his heart strongly, because he knew I needed to keep growing and changing. So in 4 years later, when the missionary came back, in that period of time, we had done everything in the church. We were mowing the yards and doing the toilets and singing in the church. Everything there was to do, we were doing it. So when missions conference came, I had a job, and he said, this is what I want to give for us as a family, but if you want to give anything on your own, that's fine. So every night there was this quaking in my heart, and I just thought it was all about money. And what I found out on Friday night, because of my Friday night, I said, Lord, I can't even tithe if I give what I think you want me to give. And that was the problem. I was doing the thinking, not God. And so it was a matter of surrendering that last piece of my heart. I never surrendered that part of my heart to be a missionary. I always thought missionaries read their Bible 24 hours a day or prayed. And they were so, because they all came in dressed up.
Right.
And that was not me. And so that was, you got to give your whole heart, not keeping back all those little pieces. And then once, when he came home, he said, I think the Lord wants us to be a missionary. It was like so much relief. I was like, is that what this is? And that's when I could fully just trust God with my whole heart.
Wonderful. Well, in Zambia, how's the spiritual climate right now? Is there a hunger for the gospel, or is Western culture?
Well, there's still a hunger, not maybe as much as there was, because of some of the cultural differences. But Zambia is a quote unquote Christian nation. You can walk up to almost anybody in Zambia that a stranger, and ask them, "Are you a Christian?" 99.9% of the time they're going to say, "Well, yes, I'm a Christian. I was baptized when I was a baby," or "I grew up in this church," or "I've been in church all my life." But you talk to them and share the gospel with them, I've never heard that before. So they've had Christianity in Zambia for, since David Livingstone's time. So they grew up, much like many people in America. You go back, a couple generations here. Same thing. And for some, I think even today, for some extent, it's still that way today in America. But yeah, everybody is a believer, but they're not saved. They're not born again. They've never heard the gospel. But yeah, it's changing somewhat, and particularly the work we're working with now, Cornerstone Baptist Church in Ndola. I've been a pastor there from the beginning. We have young men we're training now, but more. It's kind of it's in-town service. We have some people coming there who are middle class type, you'd say economically. So those type of people are harder to reach. Number one, because they've got the things they need. They don't really need God, much like many people in America today. But there's still openness, let's put it that way. They're still open to the gospel. You don't see gospel tracts on the ground. You don't see people turning you away if you want to share the gospel with them. They'll listen to you. They may not accept what you're saying, but they'll listen to you. So it's a bit different probably than a lot of places in the States.
Well, Pastor, it almost seems like we need missionaries in the United States these days. Good night. So, as you prepare to go back to Zambia this time, is there anything specifically us as a church and us as our viewers can pray for your congregations or pray for you as missionaries?
Well, I mentioned this, our Cornerstone Baptist. You have a young man there, is the church on staff. He's the youth director, associate pastor type. So I don't know if he'll eventually become the pastor, but pray that we can, probably will. We'll see how things go, but we're going to get back and continue working with that church. We have several men and women who kind of stepped up, even before we left, but since we've left, they've stepped up. A lot of that's due to our discipleship program we had there. Martian disciples, a lot of the ladies. I spent about 8 months or so with about 4 of the men, other men as well, but 4 of them in particular. So some of those men have stepped up doing some preaching and some teaching while we're gone. So pray that we can get a national pastor for that work. Pray for more laborers to come to Zambia. That's what we need. We need some young men and women surrendering to God's will to come to Zambia as missionaries. We have a youth camp ministry there. If we had to lead today, I think our churches would be fine. They would go on. 7 of those works I have a lot to do with as far as in there on a weekly basis. But our youth camp program. And it would be very difficult to run without some assistance from missionaries because of the logistics of getting food and things out there for a youth camp. So that would be some things we could pray about.
Very good.
Pastor Riggs, Mrs. Riggs, thank you so very much for joining us today. Pastor Don, if you would just close us in prayer, please.
Love to. Father, thank you so much. You are so very good. It's encouraging to hear good news from a far country. Thank you for John, for Marcia, for their faithful ministry, for all those churches that planted, the souls that have been saved, for the ones who have been trained and stepped up. So we do pray that in their latest work, you will provide the man, you will provide the leadership and the workers. And I pray the same thing for our churches here in America. God, I know we need a revival. We need people to step up in a very similar way. Help us to keep our eyes on eternity and on the wonderful message we have that Jesus Christ is still alive and still saving souls. We thank you for that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Victory family, thank you so much again for joining us today. If you would like to find out more about supporting the Riggs Missionary to Zambia, reach out, Pastor Don at victoryindy.org, or contact us through victoryindy.org under the Contact Us link. As always, remember to like and share this video with your friends, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.